What's up, guys? It's Ping Pong Masters, and today I'm gonna bring you some information about Labor Day. So today's Labor Day, Monday, September 7th. Every year Labor Day comes on a different day of the month, but it's always the first Monday in September. So we're just gonna talk about the history of Labor Day while playing some games. So according to History.com, Labor Day pays tribute to the contributions and achievements of American workers, and it was created by the labor movement in the late 19th century and became a federal holiday in 1894. Which would make it over 100 years old at this point. Labor Day weekend also symbolizes the end of summer for many Americans and is celebrated with parties, street parades, and athletic events. Actually, yesterday I saw my neighbors were doing fireworks for Labor Day. Okay, Labor Day. Why do we celebrate Labor Day? Labor Day, an annual celebration of workers and their achievements, originated during one of American labor history's most dismal chapters. In the late 1800s, at the height of the Industrial Revolution in the US, the average American worked 12-hour days and 7-day weeks in order to eke out a basic living. Despite restrictions in some states, children as young as 5 or 6 toiled in mills, factories, and mines across the country, earning a fraction of their adult counterparts' wages. People of all ages, particularly the very poor and recent immigrants, often faced extremely unsafe working conditions with insufficient access to fresh air, sanitary facilities, and breaks. So this is interesting. I like to look at history to kind of appreciate the present, which doesn't mean things aren't going bad for everyone, but generally if you're in a first world country, things are good for you, going well for you. If you look at America, average American working 12-hour days and 7-day weeks, that's not a thing anymore to eke out a basic living. So we should appreciate where we came from, I think. Anyway, as manufacturing increasingly supplanted agriculture as the wellspring of American employment, labor unions, which had first appeared in the late 18th century, grew more prominent and vocal. They began organizing strikes and rallies to protect poor conditions and compel employers to renegotiate hours and pay. This is actually pretty interesting, to me at least. This is Labor Day gaming, the history of Labor Day. So it's interesting to see the history of Labor Day and to see how it relates to current events, coronavirus and the rallies and stuff about the Black Lives Movement and everything that's going on now. It's very interesting because it says here, that they began organizing strikes and rallies. And at the time, I'm sure most people might have thought that these poor conditions and working 12-hour days and 7 days a week was just how life was, and that things used to be worse, so it was fine. So it's interesting how we see certain things now, and there are certain people who think things are fine and that there's not much we need to improve, or we don't need to strike and we don't have to have rallies to improve things. And then there are people who see it kind of seems like how people saw it in the 18th century, late 18th century, with this movement for labor unions becoming prominent and vocal and stuff like that. So that's pretty interesting, I think, because it also goes on to say that many of these events turned violent, and there was an infamous Haymarket riot of 1886 in which several Chicago policemen and workers were killed, and 10,000 workers on September 5th, 1882 took unpaid time off to march from City Hall to Union Square in New York City, which is where I live right now, holding the first Labor Day parade. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So the first Labor Day parade comes from those workers, 10,000 workers who took unpaid time to march. That's really interesting, actually. That's a lot of people. So then you see people who march now, you see some riots happening now, and it's interesting to kind of compare. Obviously, it's kind of apples to oranges. It's a very different situation now than it was back then, and it's fighting for different things like Black Lives Movement or hashtag Black Lives Matter or hashtag All Lives Matter. These things are different, but it's interesting to see how protests and riots occur in both time periods and how people deal with it. What do you guys think? Do you think in the future people will look back at the decisions we've made now and think that they were the right or wrong decisions? Because I think it's pretty obvious that most people will look back at what happened here for Labor Day and say that it was right for them to fight against these conditions of working 12-hour days and 7-day weeks. At the same time, maybe some people wouldn't agree with that. I'm really interested, actually, to hear what you guys think about that. So let me know in the comments below, Maybe we could get a debate going on this. Anyway, on June 26th, the American Railroad Union called for a boycott of all Pullman Railway cars. Ah, that's right. Employees of the Pullman Palace Car Company in Chicago went on strike to protest wage cuts. It says that as well. I kind of skipped over it a bit. So that's interesting as well. It also says that Congress didn't legalize the holiday until 12 years after workers and different states started passing legislation to recognize it. So it took, strikes and riots to kind of bring it up to federal attention, which can be an argument for riots, to have the attention of the government. But, that can be an argument. Okay, to finish off this article, it says, who created Labor... Well, it's not really an article, but to finish it up, who created Labor Day? In the wake of this massive unrest and in an attempt to repair ties with American workers, Congress passed an act making Labor Day a legal holiday. On June 28th, 1894, President Grover Cleveland signed it into law. More than a century later, the true founder has yet to be identified. So no one knows who the true founder of Labor Day is. That's really interesting. Well, maybe not too interesting, but that's interesting, I think. Labor Day is still celebrated in cities and towns across the U.S. with parades, picnics, barbecues, fireworks displays, and other public gatherings, obviously. For many Americans, especially children, it represents the end of summer and the start of the back-to-school season. That's true, right? Because don't you go to school a day after? Actually, in New York now, it's 2 days after Labor Day, because I think unions were fighting for an extra day because they're tired after Labor Day. What do you guys think of that? A lot of people say, what, teachers are too lazy or they're overworked, or, that's also an interesting topic, I think. So what do you guys make of that? Let's not kill each other in the comments, but, let's start an interesting debate on this stuff, or continue an ongoing debate, rather. And yeah, so that's essentially what Labor Day is. It essentially is the result of riots and protests against unsafe working conditions at the time, and it's something we still celebrate to this day, and it's good to know the history of why we have a day off today. And with that, I'll see you tomorrow. Please subscribe.